Welcome to the meeting, everybody. Kim is going to open with our karakia this morning.
Morena tatou, tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki woho, tuia tatou te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei, mori ora, kia tatou katoa.
Kia ora, thank you for that.
Translation up there?
Yes. Welcome. We have some, just checking who's on Zoom up there. So we have media here with us. So Max is with us in person, and I think Catherine's on Zoom up there, and we've got board member Armstrong on Zoom. Kia ora, David. And then the rest of the people are staff. Yeah, okay, thank you. Just good to know, isn't it? And welcome our board member Knowles. He's travelled over today from the Bay to join us. Thank you. Meeting's being recorded. Be available on Council's YouTube channel. And I don't know if anyone here doesn't know where the toilets are. I don't think we've got any public forum people here, have we? So let's move to apologies. We've got apologies from Councillor Walker, who's on some other council business. Councillor Greening's an apology, and Deputy Mayor Bryant. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Dowler's happy to move. Councillor Shellcrass is a second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried, thank you. No public forum speakers. Any declarations of interest, please? No, we don't have late items. We've got minutes to confirm. The minutes of the Environment and Regulatory Committee meeting held on the 3rd of August. Be confirmed as a true and correct record of the meeting. Is somebody happy to move? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Councillor Ellis, second. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. So we move to our group manager's report. So over to you, Kim, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I introduce my report, I would like to ask Katrina, our consents manager, to introduce a new staff member. And this is rather significant because we've had a new addition to our consents team, which I think is going to really pay dividends for us. So I'll allow Katrina to talk about who the new person is and the role that he's taking up, and a little bit about where he comes from.
Thank you. I just want to introduce Blair Telford. He's our new Principal Planner, Resource Consents. So that role has quite a big role as far as job description. So working through that, but it's around supporting our team leaders, our senior planners, around technical aspects of the world we work in, whether it's the RMA or the MBEA, through to hearing notified appeals, objections, and supporting our team through that. So yeah, quite a bit involved. You probably knew Alistair Jewell from previous works. Basically that's very similar. So he works alongside Phil Jewell in that space. He comes from Auckland. He might want to introduce himself, but if you want to do that, you can go right ahead.
Thank you, Katrina. Good morning, councillors, Madam Chair. Blair Telford. I am an urban planner, got a number of years experience in both public and private sector. I'm looking forward to joining the team and helping achieve some good resource management outcomes. I've got a young family who will be coming down and joining me in 2 weeks' time. So I'm looking forward to seeing them too.
Great, thank you. It's very, very good to have you here with us. Thank you. Thanks, Katrina.
So thank you for that. So now back to my report. One of the things that's on the agenda today is our compliance report. So it looks back on a year's worth of activity, but the report also flows into a commentary around the professional development that is happening in the regulatory sector, and then moves into what the changes under the Natural Built Environment Act mean for which are already in play and what they mean for that sector. Now, my group report has a bit of an introduction to the law change more generally. So we're going to hear a bit more of a deeper story on compliance. And at the next regulatory committee meeting, we'll hear a deeper story on what this all means for the consenting function, which Katrina will lead. So my report has a picture of what the regional sector had managed to extract out of the changes. And so Te Uru Kahika is a fora that we're lined up with. And so what I've provided councillors there is a snapshot as to what the new changes mean. And you'll hear in the agenda a little bit more depth about what it means for the compliance and enforcement business. Also in my report, I'm talking about a journey that is about to start under the Building Act. So the Building Act has been with us for quite some time. And before you get to legislation, you generally have quite a long run-up where officials exchange ideas, you get political sort of buy-in as to what's needed. You move through the government of the day to get the sort of approvals and for the policy direction, and then legislation follows. So on the one hand, my report deals with the conclusion of a long journey of how the RMA is being turned into different legislation. That journey is not over, but it's a long way down its path now. And also in that report, we're hearing a bit of a story about what's brewing in the Building Act side. And so that's covered off in my report, and also a submission that staff have provided towards that to encourage officials to think about the sorts of things that we see as needing improvement under the Building Act, because that's been quite some time in its since the Building Act has been reviewed, and so we're starting to that sort of journey now. And I guess that's a bit of a signal that what's happening across government at the moment. We have, as the current government comes to the end of its term, we're seeing some of the ideas now translate to fruition. And we're also starting to see the build-up of a new set of legislative arrangements. An example being the Climate Change Adaptation Act, which is the third part of the RMA reforms, is now going through an early gestation process where select committees are actually exploring what sort of elements need to be brought into that, so the nation as a whole can be better positioned for things like managed retreat. So, and that's what lies ahead of us. And what it shows is that regulation is a very dynamic world at the moment. It's while things are coming to fruition, you then move into an implementation phase, and things are also in the development phase as ideas come together. So I guess that the overall message that goes with my report is that we're in a very, very changing world, a very challenging set of times, but ultimately, if legislation and the regulation that supports it is done properly, we're all better off. And so the sort of a careful consideration that goes through designing it is a really key feature. And increasingly being able to implement it and make sense of how it's all been sort of put together is a discipline that is, I think, going to probably have more impact on us in our regulatory space than perhaps we have been in the past. So that's the sort of the overriding message of my report, which I take as read. I'm happy to, through the chair, to take any questions.
Thank you, Kim. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. What comes up for me is the extra costs to council of the implementation of a lot of these requirements, and I see this some day one requirements as well. So I'm just wondering if if you have a feel yet for how much extra cost it's going to be to council, because our ratepayers are under the pump. This legislation is coming from central government, and the question of how it gets paid for is still hanging there, really. And I appreciate that it's early days, but I think that if we can give an indication to the community that we will be doing the work that we only have to do, rather than what is nice for us to do, that would be good.
through the chair, the beauty of legislation coming through the process I've described is that you can see you have a sense of what's coming a long way out, and you can start to see that the domain that we're operating in is changing. So it's not a case of necessarily looking at all of this change as a cost plus exercise. And so there's two aspects to it. There's one is about the capacity, any new capacity we might need. And we've been slowly building that capacity on a sort of an affordable basis. And so, and Carl will be giving his next report. He's had additional capacity brought into the team in anticipation of the increased challenges that are coming. So, and in our long-term planning thinking, we're not seeing that there's a mountain of extra work. It's a case of approaching the work that we've got in a more finessed and different context. And we can see that the legislation is placing priorities in particular areas, so our resource goes into those prioritised areas. And I think at a national level, and certainly the chief executives when they come together see this, that this is not a time to be passing a whole lot of cost onto ratepayers, and most particularly the smaller councils are feeling the pinch to a greater degree than the larger councils. So that note has been made very clear, and it's the beauty of the Te Reo Kahika network that we feed into means that we're standardising and providing systems and processes that can then be deployed by the different councils rather than have to each council try and design and develop those things itself. And we've also managed to negotiate a staggered increase for a lot of the reforms that are coming our way, so that we're not as a nation doing all of these things at once, but we're sending one or two councils into the frontier land to sort this out. And then the lessons that come from it are picked up by those who are then part of the club, as it were. So, while I do appreciate that the new requirements carry an extra set of duties with them, it's not our anticipation that comes with an undue, extra burden of cost. And I think the point you make about, that our ratepayers are really feeling the burden of a lot of the council-based activity that's coming nationally is understood. And in many instances, central government are providing assistance for those who go first. So Tasman is in the queue for a number of things, but it's also pioneering on a couple of fronts. And if we are able to pioneer in terms of developing our new plan, jointly with Nelson, if we are seen as to being an early starter with a plan development under the new legislation, that will come with assistance, and that will be assistance provided by central government rather than the normal course of events. You'll be trying to extract it out of your rate-paying community. So I think I can't completely put your fears at rest, but what I can pass on is there's a genuine desire to spread and to be smart about the way that we take on these new responsibilities.
Thank you. Anything extra? No, all good. Thank you. We've got Councillor Mayling, Councillor Maru and Councillor McKenzie next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one thing I noted in here is that this isn't going to be a quick change. When I look at the papers, they're saying 7 to 10 years. I think it'll take longer for some of those plans to come to fruition. But you also look at it, there is going to be down to only 16 plans around the country instead of, I think in here it says 78. So that will be a significant change, and we should get some consistency. But the threat to all of this is the election, because one of the main players has already said within 100 days they'll change it. Now that seems a very speedy change to when this has taken over 3 years to get to this point. So that would be a bit sad if we throw out the bath with the bathwater in that. But it won't be a quick change. So we will have time to prepare for that. And we'll be living under the RMA for a number of years yet going forward.
If I certainly acknowledge that we're in a transition, and that transition will mean that at any point in time we're dealing with multiple legislation, and we've got to figure out where the Resource Management Act's still in play, and as the new planning framework comes into how the new Natural Built Environment Act takes over from that. And that is a matter that we have to make sure that as regulators, both the design and the implementation is connected and fully understood. And that is something that we take on board, and we know that sits with us. But I get, and in terms of where I guess the executive arm of government, and including that the executive arm of councils sits, they see, there's a general sense that a lot of what's coming is really positive. And there's a vehicle that we get to speak to as a sector. We speak to the incoming government, if there is a change in government, or incoming government regardless, called the Briefing for Incoming Ministers. And the central government, have already got their briefings locked away under key because I'm not allowed to play with it during the election period. But there's also an opportunity for parts of the regional sector to contribute to that. And chief executives have met, and they've actually encouraged the regional sector, so across councils, to point out what is really worth retaining of the current reforms. And the two areas that are really pointed to is retaining the water reforms, which are under the current RMA. They're not doled into they're coming through regardless. And also the new natural built environment approach. Where the affordable waters elements go, because I also comment on the fact that that's gone through the parliamentary process now. So we've got the second two pieces of legislation to fit with the other two, and just waiting for royal assent, which will happen before the new government takes over. That is the one that's probably been put most into the political arena as likely to be revisited. But even then, there are aspects of those reforms that there's a desire to retain, such as the continuance of Taumata Arawai as the water regulator. So that gives us a bit of a sense that we no longer have to be in that water regulation space for their responsibilities. But what I am angling in my report is that it's going to require us to form a new relationship with a new player in town who has some overlapping responsibilities. So how do we work that stuff through? And again, because we have the Turu Kahika network, it gives us so much capacity now to have those conversations that we've never had before. But I have to, concede that everything in front of us is a challenge. But if we play the cards rightly, we're going to be better off as a community as a result of navigating through those challenges.
Thank you. Councillor Maru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question's in regards to the Tasman local alcohol policy, really. And so in light of the Supreme Court ruling that strengthens the local alcohol policy and the community participation amendment bill that's just gone through to the Act, is there an ability to move a review of this of Tasman's LAP forward? It would be very helpful.
There certainly is an ability to do so, and I just wonder whether Daniel might want to pop up and speak to how we are looking at that opportunity.
You need to come and use them.
You never know, Daniel.
You need to use the mic so that people on Zoom can.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so good news, it did pass, and yes, we're looking at bringing our review of the local alcohol policy forward by a number of years. It's not due for another 3 years. That will be Kim's approval if we bring that forward. I'm thinking early next year, or maybe even later this year, to start the ball rolling. It will quite a bit of policy work involved, so a bit of planning, but yeah, we're bringing it forward. And there's a couple of key changes we'd be looking at making. I can brief you on those now.
Just what we've got, Daniel, there, perhaps, Daniel, in terms of the strength of the local alcohol policy now with the amendments for the rest of the councillors, what ability will that give for the community to have a wider voice pre-applications?
I don't think the voice is going to change. Everyone can submit whether you're an alcohol licensee or whether you're someone that doesn't want an alcohol license. The big difference will be once we develop the policy and it goes through council and it's approved. Then my understanding is that there's very limited appeal processes, whereas before that's where we got caught up. And if you look at what happened in Auckland, they got really caught up in that appeal process. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. Firstly, I would just like to acknowledge the work put in by councillors Alison Maru on the recent liquor licence application. I mean, I think that was, a big job, and certainly, appreciate the work that you've done there. My question actually was around building consents. And I mean, obviously the system's being looked at and how it can be improved. I'm wondering whether do we already utilise everything that's available to us to streamline and make the system operate as efficiently as possible, particularly, for example, the use of photographs and videos to be able to record what's being done without people having to go out and inspect. Do we already utilise that?
We have that particular point through the chair. We have a trial, but I think Matt would be best placed to update you on how we're thinking that that can play out.
Morning to you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we are looking at trialling an app where we will go out on remote inspections. So we sit in the office and just run through the inspection with the person on site. So that is coming, but it's probably going to be closer to next year before that happens. We do take photographs at the moment, providing the good photographs. They can just send them through, and we rely on producer statements if we can't make it. They're like, depending on what the inspection involves, but quite often they are a little bit too complicated to accept as a photo. But the video thing is quite good. It has been used quite a bit around the country, but it's quite expensive as well, but probably is, it's not a bad option.
If I could, Chair, so is this app already developed? Do we have to develop it? Is it within our scope of the digital improvement program? Will the costs end up being borne by the consent holders?
I can't quite answer who would pay for it, but it's the app has been developed, and I'm pretty sure it can be run alongside our systems. So it runs within the Alpha One system. It's just an add-on to that the system that we use currently. But yeah, it's just a case of finding that time to trial it at this stage, because we got to get a process and all the procedures in place. Nelson, we're working with Nelson on it a little as well, and we've got some contractors that use it elsewhere in the country. So it's just finding the time to get in with them and come up with a good process that covers it all.
I mean, I guess what sits behind my question is that as we advance on this technological world, we obviously need to look at all opportunities to actually gain whatever efficiencies, A, for the council, but B, for the person wanting, in this case, a consent. So, I am aware that it is used in other parts of the country. So, do we have a firm plan and timetable and working towards it? So, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
If I should just say, it's some comment to this exchange. It's fair to say that an act that has last looked at in 2004 is going to struggle to keep up with where legislation is going. And if you look at the nature of the questions that have been asked, you'll see that the integration of the Building Act with, for instance, the resource consenting process is deemed to be inadequate in terms of legislative requirements and needs updating. So there's a big thing here about trying to make acts working together. And Building Act has been a little bit left behind in terms of integration as new acts have changed. So that's the that's the first point on that. And the second point, which was with me, and I've just lost it.
The point around, have we got a plan in terms of the app and implementing that? Yeah, well, I think it was more to the talking to our DIP project and really wanting to reinforce how broad a scope that is taken, because everything we're doing is
compartmentalized at the moment under various requirements, but with our broader scope, we're seeing connectivity and the use of technology. And I think this council is being really quite future thinking in the way it's approaching that. So wherever this stuff goes, we are looking at a process which will make sure we maximize the abilities for our information systems can do as much as possible and automate so much of what at the moment is a little bit clunky. So, we're trying to sort of stay ahead of the changing landscape. And while we're currently committed to using a particular system for our Building Act work, we're not saying that can't actually move if a better solution emerges. So we're not staying where we are. We're actually looking to move to the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Anything further from anybody? Councillor Butler, and we're looking for someone to move the report.
Yes, I'm happy to move.
Thank you.
I've just got one question in relation to one of the day one things, which is to do with contaminated land management and the Hale Register. And I'm not actually sure where council sits on this. Do we have a lot of work to do? Do we have a proper register? Because I know that issues do come up in relation to old sheep dip sites and that kind of thing. So is there going to be more work to do with that, or are we actually well positioned?
My understanding is that we are well positioned, but Steve, can you offer some thoughts around that question?
So it's through the chair. Yeah, we are well positioned. We've got a register. There is work for us to do. So it's not a simple question to meet the needs of making that information public. There's some stuff we've got to do, particularly around the privacy of some of that information, where we might have to withhold things for certain reasons. And the information needs to be in a form that we can easily publish it so that those accessing that information can derive the right kind of insights from it. So there's work to do. We're well placed, and we have a register at the moment.
Just as a follow-up, Steve, how does that work, that there's an instruction, really that these sites need to be made public and available to the public, and there's a privacy issues? How does that work?
I'm not sure that I'm fully understanding your question, but I'll say this and then we'll see if I've got it right. We need to look at the information that we hold about where we've got Hale sites, and in making that information available, might we disclose information about the landowner or other details that are subject to some privacy requirements, and we need to check that, is what I'm saying. So that's part of the work that we've got to do, is make sure that when we make that information public, we're only making that information public that it is appropriate for us to do so, because our current register might hold more information than we are entitled to release.
Thank you. Councillor Kinnemont.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Drummond, your report. Thank you. On page 14 of the Day One Communications book, put out by Te Uru Kahika, did I pronounce that correctly? The second bullet point is a huge effect on the way we're going to be doing things. The new Act requires genuine partnership with Te Turiiti partners. We'll be connecting with iwi hapu in different and new ways. We're working that out together. Having spent 2 very enjoyable sessions on Marais, and just looking around the table here today, we are going to be tipped upside down if we're going to have a genuine partnership. And I'm just wondering, they're talking about it working out together. Can you give me a bit of a heads up or anything that's been happening behind the scenes in that area?
Through the chair, I'll attempt to answer some of that. My starting point in that is that our partnership has not been, since it was set up in 1840, hasn't really been given true effect. In fact, so what we've tended to see is the government assume control over aspects of our environmental system that they've assumed control rather than moved into a partnership situation. So we're got a big gap to close as a nation where we are right now. And what the new act is signalling is, as previous acts have, but not with a great deal of effect, is that we've got to come together and actually start to see our iwi partners as partners. So that is a big challenge for us, and it's also a big challenge for iwi as well, because through that period of time of being disconnected from those responsibilities, the capacity to engage with a big machinery of government has been somewhat diminished. So we're now in this particular region, we're through the settlement processes, for instance, and iwi are building their capacity and increasingly positioning themselves to be able to engage on matters that historically they haven't been able to because of the approach that the government has taken. So there's a gap, and it's going to take time for that gap to fill. The sector recognises that this all can't be done at place in every situation. While it's got its own merits, there's a capacity that needs to be built across the sector. So the council sector is approaching that through having formed a NC inside Te Reo Kahaka, which actually means that we've got people that are trying to make progress in this space across the whole region, and that and that is from our side to understand the capacity constraints of Māori, and also the ability to actually move into more of a partnership arrangement. So I think it's fair to say that we don't actually have a solution sitting in front of us right now, but what we have is a will and a commitment and a desire to fill that space, and that's what we will see happen progressively, and it's no instant magical fix.
I could add a little, perhaps, although your question's not directed to me, of course, but I think the ways in terms of our council and the various layers, I'd say, where there is the relationship developing and being furthered with the mana whenua iwi of our rohe, our district, and that happens at mayors and chairs. So the mayors of the three councils meet with the iwi chairs regularly. So the iwi chairs get together and have their hui. I'm not sure how often, if that's monthly or 2 monthly, and the mayors of the three councils go along and meet and are a part of that. And I've been involved in one of those hui. It's a good forum, and that's something that's developed more recently. CEOs of councils and the GMs, the general managers of the iwi, they have forums. Leonie's nodding, so that's working. So that's going on. I think our policy teams, I'm aware of there's a iwi policy team that meets with our policy people as things get further. So it might be helpful if we actually do have another presentation at some point around the areas in which we are working with the iwi, mana whenua iwi, the Māori community generally. That's probably another thing to discuss. There's requirements there. And of course, on our standing committees, we now have seats for mana whenua representation on them. Now, they haven't been filled yet, and we could get an update perhaps on that process. So to know that things are happening, but in terms of the compliance space, I was interested to read that too, and to think about the freshwater area and iwi interest and compliance around those matters. That's very clear to me. And when I think about some of the other compliance areas we're involved with, and then having a partnership approach in that's of interest to me about how that could be formulated and enacted, and what it would mean even really. Yeah. Yes.
Can I just say through the chair, totally agree 100% with what you're talking about. And I'd like to see us as a council promote our partnership, promoting what we're doing, not only through a presentation, but even there's something going out regularly in the newsline to say, this is what we've been doing this month. The iwi chairs and the CEOs have been meeting. This is what's been coming out. The more we get out there, the more we'll get our community behind us and working with us. So I promote being open and having more dialogue with the community than waiting for government to tell us what to do. So can I ask through Mr. Drummond that, you know, something does come back, that we do have a promotional program of what was happening in the space.
I'll take that as an action item. What we can, so we can come back to this committee with what our, you know, what we can deliver on that front. And I'll just add to the chair's summary of where these connections are taking place. Speaking on behalf of the sort of the regulatory layer where all this stuff often lands, our consenting team has been very proactive in terms of teaming up with the environmental managers that were within the iwi to come up with a better way of understanding each other's needs and from our point of view, accessing a deeper level of knowledge than actually exists in the sort of the formal processes. So we're starting to build our capability of being able to go beyond what is sort of like publicly available to get a greater understanding of the significance of the sites and things that have happened in this region historically. The baton has now been transferred to our compliance team, who have always been willing, but recognising the capacity constraints, to engage more closely with iwi, and the new requirements require us to go beyond where we've been. So we're now in that space of coming down through the chairs, through the CEs, through the planners, through the consenting guys, and it's now real as a challenge for our compliance team. And we've got to approach that conscious of the capacity constraints that we have. And indeed, we've been on marae to hear where that capacity sits, what their aspirations are. And they've also made it clear that while they may be constrained at times from engaging with us, they have their own strategies, which they would assume that we are accessing and drawing from. So there's quite a lot of work we can do and take if we take the partnership approach and trust ourselves to do, you know, make available or use the information that's available to us. And we've got to build confidence that we can understand and interpret what that information is telling us. So there's a journey here for us, which is which is at the frontier end, because this is where it really bites.
Thank you. Great to raise, Councillor. And when I say a presentation, I guess a report, you know, I'm not sure quite where it would sit in our sort of schedule of reporting, but I think a reporting from maybe our Kaihotu team or somewhere. Anyway, Leonie's, we can have a chat about that later, about where that best sits, eh? So I think an update about that would be very helpful. So we've had a mover, Councillor Butler, and seconded by Councillor Shallcrass. Is there anything further from anybody? I'll put the resolution that we receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. And I didn't mean to say that, again, I appreciate the overview, Kim, of what you're presenting. It's helping me, and I think us, just to keep a track of this, you know, array of changes and reforms that are coming through. So thank you for articulating those in that way, and really helpful to have the day one communications attachment, and to acknowledge too, again, thank you, Councillor McKenzie, about the Mapuwa Sepulchre hearing and the licensing committee and the work that went in there. And interesting to note, one of the bigger hearings nationally happening, eh? So thank you for that acknowledgement. We're going to move to Carl. Our annual compliance and enforcement report. Welcome. Thank you for your report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillors. Good morning.
There might be some key points you might like to emphasise.
I think actually a lot of it has already been touched on by the group manager in regards to quite a bit of it. Yeah, I mean, I think the compliance annual report does tell a story of what we've done over the year. The metrics that come out of this does also feed into that regional collective information gathering that you sort of, we've referred to in that to Urakahika report and that. So it's useful in, while we're outlining what we do as a compliance monitoring group in our area, it's also compared obviously nationally and used for painting that picture about, you know, resource and where effort and those issues that come from, you know, across a national sort of framework. So that is quite useful. So other than that, yeah, I mean, that also kind of like sort of is a segue into those type of Te Ura Kahika reports and reviews that look at resource and all the other aspects of, you know, where compliance and enforcement sits and you know, the importance of it, but also how it's managed and how that story is told. So I was just going to highlight that. You know, this does all plug into a bigger picture thing. In regards to the year, I think you know, it's been busy. The good thing that I think is worth noting is that our compliance, you know, we've increased our effort of monitoring, and that, so we've managed to monitor quite a lot more resource consents, despite the fact that we've obviously had, you know, a lot of reactive work we have to do with our complaints and our public service that we do for our pollution response, and that the good thing is that while we've increased our compliance monitoring and obviously been able to monitor more, the thing to note is that the compliance has stayed reasonably high. Like we haven't, as we've increased our monitoring, seen a decline in exposing like bad behavior or poor performance. It's actually it's a good indication that a lot of our consent holders out there are actually generally compliant.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that's come out of it for me. But I'm happy to go to questions on the finer points of the report.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Carl. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair. I do have, I think, 4 questions.
Great.
If you
Good.
want to cut me off at
No,
any
no, I'd
time.
never cut you off, Councillor Mackenzie. You go for it. That's what we're here for. That's the purpose of the meeting. A lot of work's gone into the report, and I think it's great that you've got plenty of questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Carl, for the report. And yeah, I mean, it's obvious we're monitoring a lot more, and as you say, the compliance has been pretty good. So it left me wondering though, in terms of how much we're monitoring and whether I couldn't kind of see it in the other report, how we're benchmarked across other councils. So in terms of the percentage of consents that we do monitor, and that's increasing, you know, are we low or high compared with other councils? So you might know the answer to that, or you might just want to satisfy me later with that piece of data, but I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, so the metrics report that I was referred to in the Te Ura Kahika and the review, that's been going for 5 years. So that's a kind of like a comparison of regional councils and unitaries. They've all got kind of different frameworks in regards to how they do stuff. Because we're a unitary, we kind of have to exclude out our district council because we're trying to just compare apples to apples. So what we do is we try to just take all our regional council function and put it into that metrics report. So when you look at us as a district, obviously we've got all our district activities as well. So that's not compared in those metric reports. And there's no other reports that kind of do that kind of comparison or benchmarking. So in regards to how we look against a regional consented space, yeah, we're not the highest. We are improving. But I can make available all those reports. They're actually available. You can actually look at all the data that's broken out and compared.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can approach this from a risk perspective, and we've got the risk matrix that drives our level, but how do you know actually whether you're monitoring to the right level? That's kind of just what I'm left wondering, but I'm happy to,
So, sorry, Councillor Mackenzie, that's the question that came out of the review as well, is that I think one of the telling things that the CSIG group will go away and look at is it's all very well gathering all the data and then sort of presenting it all, but doesn't really tell if you're effective at what you're doing, which I think is what you're kind of alluding to, is that you can present all this information, and that's what was one of the findings from our report, is that, you know, we have to be a bit more nuanced and also have a look a little bit more at what we do gather and how we measure that against, you know, to kind of demonstrate, are we making a difference? Are we in the right direction? Are we resourcing it appropriately in the right places? And that's something that I think that all the regional councils have agreed they need to go away and have a look at and tell a better story in that respect.
All right, appreciate that. If I could just move on to my next question, which is on page 55, paragraph 5.23. This is sewage discharges community wastewater. So we've got 8 council-owned wastewater treatment plants. Non-compliance is still evident. So is that satisfactory that our own systems are non-compliant when in actual fact we expect compliance from everybody else?
No, probably not. No, I guess the non-compliance is minor. It doesn't take much to be non-compliant. I guess the thing I would say is that if you're not compliant, you're not compliant. So if you fail to meet a condition of consent, we are obliged to mark you as non-compliant. So I guess with a lot of the community wastewater schemes, for them to maintain compliance over a year, they have to achieve those conditions, and they don't always achieve those conditions. Therefore, they will be marked as non-compliant. The level of non-compliance, fortunately, is at that lower end of the scale. They might trigger some. I can't remember off the top of my head all the non-compliances, but they may trigger a reporting issue where they haven't achieved that, or it may be that their sampling data they don't meet the parameters of their sampling. So I mean, yeah. So but that's the story. I mean, they don't meet compliance.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree that if they don't comply, then they don't comply, and that needs to be reported. I guess maybe then my supplementary question would be, how does the system work within TDC that you pick up these issues of non-compliance? We obviously need to liaise with our operations arm of the council. So is that system working well between?
Yep. So non-compliance is if you're a consent holder, whether you're a council organisation, or you're a member of the public or community or business that owns a consent, the same processes we go through. So as a consent holder, our engineering department, our community wastewater team, we engage with them. They will tell us what the story is, and we will then go through that ordinary process of dealing with them. So depending on the level of non-compliance, they go through the same decision-making processes to the same outcomes for resolution or resolving the issue, or what response we provide to them. So yeah, at this stage, because they're reasonably minor.
Thank you. I'm just moving on to my next question. So this is in regards to on page 59, where we report that Aswood New Zealand Limited have got a big red box there. So is that something that we should be concerned about? I mean, you've got a major operation there. Are we confident that that's going to be resolved?
Yes. Got to be careful how I respond. The matter is proceeding because it is significant non-compliance. It is going through a process now of being dealt with as a significant offence. So I'm not sure how I can.
Okay, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm happy not to go into any more detail, but I mean, obviously, from our perspective, we get the report, they're named, it's red. So anyway, we'll move on. And then my last question with regards to this report. So I'm looking at the data on environmental, complaints, and I'm looking at how most of them seem to be in the noise area. And then later on, I'm reading the information about dogs, and I can't help but think then that like about half of these complaints on noise are actually all to do with dogs. And I'm thinking, is there not some, what is the solution to that? Because it seems like it must consume an enormous amount of time and energy.
So noise is outside. I just reported that because it's an RMA, area in the Act of Section 16 is noise. But the experts are sitting behind me, Councillor McKenzie. I might default that question to them.
Probably got one myself, by the way, but
Tana koutou katoa. Morning, Madam Chair, through you. The noise complaints listed in the compliance report relate to out of hours noise responses by our contractors who deal with that. In the vast majority of cases, they won't relate to dogs. So barking complaints under Section 55 of Dog Control Act are dealt for our animal control function. And so they're two separate issues, although it is possible that somebody could phone council at 3 a.m. and say, my neighbour's dog is barking continuously. Can somebody come and look at it? And it would probably be our noise contractor who would go and look at it. But a majority of noise that would come in Cole's report there relates to party noise, machinery noise, human control type noise.
okay, all right. Well, I mean, later on in the report, when it does talk about dogs, I mean, that is obviously still an issue that consumes time. So coming to this report then, in terms of noise, I mean, when I still see that there's an activity that generates a lot of kind of work, I'm always going, what is there something else that we can get in behind it in terms of the root cause to actually eliminate the complaints? So how do we analyse all of that data to work out if there's something else that can be done?
Is that just a noise you're referring to?
For you, Madam Chair. The problem is everybody's an individual. Most people are responsible. Most people don't want to upset their neighbours. Some people don't care. Some people are naive and some people are stupid. And so you can try as hard as you like to educate people, to regulate people, even punish people through fines and everything else. But some people will always still make noise and upset their neighbours. So we are trying to do our job by educating people about what they do, by taking action against those that continuously cause problems. There are new rules coming in which will affect how we can deal with people who are continually noisy. At the moment, we can issue them an excessive noise direction, which lasts for 72 hours. And if they breach it again, we can go back and seize whatever they're making noise with. And that's going to be extended out to 8 days, just to stop them having fun for 2 weekends. But to give you an example, when I was the regulatory manager in Ashburton, we had one property which we seized 3 radios, 2 computers, a new stereo system they brought in, and finally we even seized the car with the stereo in it to stop them making noise to annoy their neighbours. And so that's how doggedly determined some people are to flout the rules. So unfortunately, with the best will in the world, we cannot control every single individual's response to legislation and proper behaviour.
Okay. There you go.
So what one did you fit into, Christine? So what one did you fit into?
Anything further, councillor? No, thank you. Anybody else? Some questions or comments for Carl in the report? No. We're looking for a mover and a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Dowell is going to move and Councillor Kinnamont's going to second. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against and carried. Thank you, Carl, for your report. Yes, you do. Preparing for changing to compliance and enforcement as a result of the NBEA. Yes, it does.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I think a bit of this has already been touched on now by the group manager and some of the other councillors and questions. So obviously it highlights that there's significant change certainly a strengthening, I would say, in obviously the area of interest for us, which is the compliance and enforcement space. There's a lot more powers, there's a lot more tools that have come in to obviously use to gain compliance and to provide that response to non-compliance. It does raise some challenges for us. Of course, we have to now adapt to this. We're going to have to evolve our processes and incorporate these changes. Unfortunately, they are staggered, as we've sort of seen and comments have been made. It's not while it has been switched on now. There was a transition schedule in the Act that allowed it to transfer back into the RMA while the RMA is in existence. So we can kind of pick up some of these things and get them going straight away. But many of them are staggered over 6 and up to 2 years, and some are not available until such time as we have our own MBE plan, and we turn the MBEA on. So we've got to sort of pick this up now and get it going. So I guess for us, the challenge is to incorporate it into our decision-making processes, give it recognition as and when those tools are available, because some of them are civil tools, where they refer to them as civil, which means that they're not, the transgressor doesn't necessarily get a conviction out of any of this now. For some of these tools, we can use these to achieve what we need to achieve in our compliance, without the need to go through prosecutions and all those other things. So that's there's some useful things there, but we have to, I guess that's a challenge for us, is to incorporate these now into our processes, understand them. One of the good things is that we're not the only ones in this boat. So MFE are committed to giving us assistance in this space. So again, predominantly being driven through Te Urakaika, the regional council group, the CSIG group, with MFE, who've got a director that is 2 staff that are dedicated to support. They are going to help us, develop tools and templates and try to provide some guidance documents and sit with us as a council, as the councils have to land this and develop process so that everyone can kind of share knowledge and kind of develop and go forward. So we're in a quite useful area in that regard. So we do have MFE in the tent with us doing this, and that will also save on us, spending money trying to work it out ourselves and going through lawyers. And so I guess that's probably as much as I need to touch on.
So just to build on a little bit about what Carl said there, if you sit back from these changes, the key messages that I've taken from this is that new tools have become available under the new Act, but they've been transferred for the meantime into the RMA. So we've got a lot of these tools right here and now. We're not the only players in town anymore. There's an ability for civil actions to be taken. So people who perceive an environmental harm being incurred can take their own steps. So civil actions are now enabled. And the third thing that strikes for me is that each council has got to wrap up its game plan for how it's going to deal with these challenges in a compliance strategy. And at the moment, this council has an enforcement policy, it has compliance and investigation guidelines, and it has a draft set of standard operating procedures. So all of these sort of areas are covered in 3 different documents. What this signals to me is that we're going to have to roll that all together, and the council is going to have a compliance strategy, which is that there's a little bit umming and ahhing going on at national level as to whether that can be developed now or whether it has to wait for our new planning framework. The direction that I get from national people is that it was intended to be in play when our new planning framework gets put in place. So we've got a little bit of a pathway and a runway to develop now what it is that we're going to put together and how we are going to operate in this new environment. And that is a really interesting exercise for us to go through. And it's going to have to be all of council. This is not just a case of the delivery end, deciding how to do it. It's a council-wide challenge to figure out how are we going to work with our community now in partnership with iwi to deliver the sorts of outcomes that the Act is targeting. It's no longer an objectives-based framework, it's actually an outcomes-based approach. So it's all about taking all players in the community who have skin in the game to a point where we're achieving the sorts of outcomes that are going to be designed into our planning framework in accordance with the Act. At the moment, we run under objectives. We're trying to achieve things and sometimes we're chasing our tail forever. This become much more deliberate and much more inclusive. So it's a really exciting time to be a regulator.
Yeah.
You might not have heard those words before, but I actually believe it's a challenge that we will get up to embrace. We've got great connections across the regions and into the central government. We're building our relationships with iwi, so I think we're geared up to work with iwi on this journey. And this compliance strategy, I think, is going to be a really valuable piece of work and something which we can bring the council right alongside what our overriding game plan is. So I think these are really exciting opportunities for us, and I hope that this is why I hope that some of the legislation that's now in play doesn't necessarily get pulled apart too quickly without some thought being applied to it.
Thank you. Councillor Mailing's got a question or comment.
Oh, more of a question and a significant change that I see on page 120 of your report, Carl. Thank you, Madam Chair. In that civil matters that are there, that changes the burden of proof significantly. So it goes from beyond a doubt to on the balance of probabilities. So that to me is a significant change in this area in particular. And the other area of change I see is cost recovery, which again, it can take the burden from the ratepayer in some way, but it may put it on the consent holder in another way. So it's something to think about if you're holding a consent and you know what the conditions of your consent are, and you flout those conditions, there can be other implications than just the penalty.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, same applies to permitted activities. So we've now got a vehicle to actually, get a certificate that you are operating in a permitted activity, and an obligation to monitor that and to charge against it. And all of these tools really come into play when our new combined plan with Nelson comes into play. So that is, as you know, as a council, we've been tagged to be being considered as an early adopter. So we're going through the exercise to see how ready we are for that. And then it will be a government decision to choose who those first councils are off the rank to develop their regional plans. One would think that all of this lines up quite nicely for us to actually have a sea change, really, in terms of how we're going about managing these sorts of activities right across a broader region than just Tasman. But we've obviously got to earn our stripes there first, and we've got to see that we're ready, and the government's got to decide that we ought to be the early adopters, and then our planning framework progresses alongside the development of our compliance strategy that fits to it with different players involved. So that's why I think there's a great opportunity in front of us, but we've just got to be assessed as to whether we're ready for it or not.
On that, Councillor Mailing, yes, I think one of the important changes has been that under the RMA, we could never recover the costs associated with investigations. If they a big part of our business was responding to non-compliance and all that time when we could never recover that cost. This allows us to do that. So I think for the polluters, or the transgressors, this is a good opportunity for council to use this to at least offset so that the ratepayer is not paying for these people. So that's quite a good change. It does highlight that there's been a little bit of a discussion as to whether that we needed to go through the consultation process and get a schedule of charging into our charge regime or not. Most councils have gone down that they'd go through that annual planning consultation process for schedule of charge. And I guess that's a conversation we have to have, is how we are going to manage imposing this charge, on the framework of it. So I flagged that in this report. I know some councils, they've already started to use that in their schedule of charge, and they've included those provisions. So it's probably just something for the council to be aware of.
If I could just jump in on that one, Carl, there's another line of thinking coming out that this is not something that you need to work through your fees and charges. It's actual and reasonable costs, and so therefore you're not required to put it into that framework. But the key thing is it is actual reasonable, so we can only recover the costs that have actually been incurred. So the discipline around accounting for those costs is going to be quite crucial to this. Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Maru and then Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, just at 6.1, I'm just interested in what's the composition of the enforcement decision-making panel? And I couldn't find it. I just scrolled because I didn't. But it's at 6.1. It talks about just getting everybody up to the same speed with compliance officers, the peer reviewers, and the enforcement decision-making panel. What is the enforcement decision-making panel, or who is it?
Oh, so the enforcement decision-making panel. So that's already part of our current process. So that's so there's, I guess I could explain that the process is there's two hierarchies of decision making that we make. There's at the officer level when they are trying to resolve non-compliance, they go through a decision making process using a guidance document, and that's a peer review decision, and the outcome of that would obviously be that we select the right tools to deal with that non-compliance at that point. If it's significant non-compliance and it has to go, it's looking like it's going to go towards what we call that significant resolution stage, to use the one term, i.e. a prosecution or any matter that's likely to go before the court. It goes to an enforcement decision-making group. And that composition is made up of nominated people, which are, in this case, the two team leaders, the regulatory manager, and one of our legal and democracy team. So they make that decision, and then it goes to the delegated authority to continue that process.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back to that discussion on cost recovery. So if I was a landowner and I was unhappy with what was happening next door, and I sought an investigation by the council, but it was deemed that actually it was all tickety-boo, do these provisions enable you to charge me as the landowner that complained when there was no basis for it?
No, I wouldn't think so. It would, because it would have a chilling effect, I think, on people who were making complaints. I would think, among other things, but it's generally, I think, designed to recover the costs of people who have been identified as in breach of a rule. So council's gone to the cost of having to investigate, provide a response to all that stuff. Is to recover the cost of that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Looking for somebody to move. Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Mailing, for the second. Thanks for your report around this. There's quite a lot to take in, isn't there? Like with all the changes that are coming through, and it's very helpful to have things, expressed pretty fully. It certainly helps me to get my head around the things that are coming and changing now. And just knowing your point about, the considerable change that we're facing and the need to have an education strategy rolled out in terms of the regulated community, as people won't like being called, but it's the reality, isn't it? Is that so I think the way that we let people know, and we're letting people know about so much, a lot, even though we hear that you never tell us anything, it's quite a balance, I think, around what we're letting, as council, letting people know about a whole range of things. And then how we do this, I think, will be really important, how we frame this.
I agree, Madam Chair. I think it's one of our challenges now is how we socialise these changes with our community out there, and how we do that. We're going to have to work out that strategy. I mean, we'll have a common strategy that will, that we're intending to put on our website, and that's been guided a little bit by Te Urakaika's kind of like more wider, which we saw in that comms package, but. We need to have that conversation with the individuals and with the sectors and the groups out there to make them aware. I mean, it's got a lot of work to do there in that space.
Yeah, thank you. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you very much, Carl. Adrian and Shannon, Dog Control Act. Section 10A report. Welcome.
Sounds exciting,
Doesn't it?
Sounds exciting.
Yep.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I believe that Shannon has probably met all of you by now, but if you haven't met Shannon, Shannon Green is our regulatory support officer. He took over from Tub of Kingy. He's been here for about 3 months now, and he's made a very large impact, doing a really good job for us. And he's the principal author of this report, but I am going to deliver it to you in case there's any questions, because I've been around this function a bit longer. I'll take the report as read, Madam Chair, if you're happy for me to do that. And I'll just summarise the main points that we put in the executive summary and answer any questions on that. So this report, every year, we're required to deliver it to the Department of Internal Affairs. They collate all responses from around the country and put out a national document of where dog control is going under Dog Control Act 96. We've got a continually increasing number of dogs. I think when I got here in 2010, we had about 7,500 dogs. We're now 12,500, and we're going up by about 400 a year. A couple of years ago, we had a tipping point where urban dogs took over from rural dogs. And that's possibly partially due to changes in farming practices, but primarily it just shows that we are got growing urban areas and static rural areas for population, and it's something which affects us across the board as a council. This year we had 3 people who we disqualified from dog ownership. 2 of those were following prosecutions. In both cases, there were people who did not look after the dogs properly and caused significant harm. The other one was somebody who was a frequent problem, who kept getting infringement notices. And there's a provision in the Act that if you are infringed 3 times within 2 years, we must disqualify you unless we see there's a reason not to. What is quite interesting is that we tend not to disqualify people until we believe we've given them a fair go. And we are very, very conscious of the fact that people need to have the opportunity to modify their behaviour. But they get to a point, and then at that point, we would disqualify them. Our complaint numbers have continued to fall. I personally think this is possibly due to the fact that people aren't stuck at home so much. I think over the pandemic, a lot of people were at home who weren't normally at home, so they were complaining about lots of stuff, which included dogs wandering, barking, lost, that sort of thing. And we seem to be doing the job pretty well. In the recent customer satisfaction survey, for about the 12th year in a row, 10th year in a row, we've got over 90% in customer satisfaction, which is phenomenal, I think. Some people think dog control is easy. Anybody who tries to take a dog off somebody will tell you that it isn't easy. The way in which people react to their pets, they're like children. And so it's an extremely delicate thing for us to do. But some dogs are very serious weapons. So we need to treat it with all seriousness. So I'm particularly proud of that result of both our animal control contractor and of our staff who've achieved that. So, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Adrian and Shannon. Yes, Councillor Maru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are the types of dogs changing, Adrian? Are we now talking more little dogs rather than farm dogs, big dogs, or is the mix evenly?
I could tell you every single breed of dog we have in the district. We can do that because part of the National Dog Database, we're required to identify dogs by breed. The only weakness in that, some people will refer to something which is really a pit bull to a Labrador Whippet cross. However, we do have records from the National Dog Database and we can provide that. The most common dog in the district is a collie, border collie.
Oh.
And we have the odd really weird and wonderful dogs out there as well, which have got their own breeds. But yeah, we can provide that information. That's an alarm going off in my pocket. I apologise for that.
I wouldn't mind a hot chocolate.
Did you want to take the orders now?
If I can explain, Madam Chair, if you would indulge me for 30 seconds. Last week when I was on leave, I actually stayed in bed until now and I had the alarm wake me up. So there you go.
Yeah.
I apologise, I didn't cancel it.
With Madam Chair's permission, Thank you, Mr. Humphries, but your excuse is denied. I'd like on.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Board Member Knowles.
Thank you very much for your report, Adrian. Look, living in Golden Bay, we do have a lot of beaches. And I don't really see a lot in the report about dogs harming wildlife on beaches. I know it's a big fact over in the Bay, and so I'm just wondering what more could be in the report about that, or how compliance could actually deal with that a bit more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a number of reasons why wildlife being harmed in Golden Bay is in the report. The first one is the fact that this report is prescribed what we actually put in it at the strategic level. Secondly, we do get lots of reports of dogs on beaches in Golden Bay, but we do not get presented with evidence of dogs causing harm frequently. We are aware of some. I can refer to Tatter Beach, where a couple of penguins have been killed. I can refer to Kai Territory, which I know isn't in Golden Bay, where we recently had 3 penguins killed, and it's believed that dogs caused the problem. These aren't things we report back to DIA. They would be in my normal manager's report. However, we do patrol in Golden Bay. The reality is we cannot stop dogs getting onto beaches when we got, I think in Golden Bay alone, we have something like 68 kilometres of beaches there. So the way in which we would deal with that is when we review the bylaw next year, possibly, if that's what the public and the council want, we would put provisions in there to make it more difficult for people to take dogs on beaches in some areas. And then if the council wanted it and the public wanted it, we'd have to look at increasing policing of that. But the practical reality is that we cannot have somebody on every beach every time. And a lot of the reports we get are of people with the dog on a beach, and they may or may not be legally allowed to be there. We tend to concentrate our efforts on areas where dogs should not be, and we will take action against people if we find them, although we do get infringements cancelled as well if the people seem to be wanting to comply. So we do the best we can. There's an argument that we should increase dog frees quite significantly and put more rangers over in Golden Bay. Again, we could do that if that's what the public wants and that's what the council wants. However, we've got to do a cost benefit on that and be realistic about it.
Deputy Mayor Brian, welcome to the meeting. Good up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies for joining the meeting late, but I'm able to now. Thanks to Adrian for the report. Just had a question around 4.7, Adrian, which is the dog reparation or compensation for which possibly occurred near Tapuera. Do we have any ability to ensure that the reparation is paid? $7,000 is obviously a lot of money in this day and age.
For you, Madam Chair, is actually an order of the court. So the court will ensure that the money is paid and that they'll follow up on that. In that case, the person who was receiving a reparation were actually amazingly not overly concerned, but it's a court order for that person to pay that. So if they do not pay the reparation, the court will take further action against them involving bailiffs or whatever else. So it's not a council job to check up on that reparation.
Okay, thanks for that, because I think there may be other monies owed around as well. So that's for the courts, obviously. Yeah, but once again, thanks for Adrian for the report and all the work you do in this area, including stock control. We had one cattle beast on the main road at Spring Grove last night, but I went and looked for it but couldn't find it, so it must have jumped back in. All good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm staying here for a while.
Oh, good. Great. Any other questions, or you happy to move, Councillor McKenzie? Thank you. Somebody's happy to second, Councillor Shellcrass. Thank you. I do note in the report, attacks on humans. It's pretty serious, isn't it? And I just note and I've had a dog have a bit of a go at me quite a long time ago. And as I was wandering along Orphanage Creek this morning, these tiny little dogs that come along and I'll just move away still. Like it has a really big impact on you to have one latch onto you, you know, and this isn't really therapy for me, is it? But you know, but I'm just looking in here, you know, at 2021 there was 62 attacks on humans, dropped down 2022, and then we're down to 33 in 2023. That's interesting, isn't it? So that's almost like a half.
Yeah,
Just at a pandemic thing about more people at home, were we allowed to be out walking around then? I don't know.
I think, Madam Chair, these are the ones we know about. I think most attacks on people happen within the home and we never hear about them. I think a better statistic, if we really wanted to know how frequent dog attacks are, is to go through to Whātua Ora and look on the health records, because through them and ACC, they do have dog bite as a report. But then again, we don't know if it happened in our district, in Nelson or anywhere else. So, but these are the ones we're aware of. These are the complaints. These are the ones we've investigated and confirmed and taken action on.
Yeah, thank you. And just a note, you know, about the satisfaction survey, 92% is pretty good, isn't it? So acknowledging that, and that'll be a result of your team as well. You know, that how you're working, how you're managing your team, and it's a very delicate area. So we had an animal control subcommittee meeting the other day, a couple of days ago, and it's quite a business to be with people who's aren't able to manage their dogs, perhaps, or whatever's gone down. You know, they're certainly dear to their hearts, and it's a very delicate matter to be dealing with people and their dogs. And so, you know, appreciate the efforts that you all put in to try and manage these delicate things in a fair and reasonable way. So thank you for your work, and please pass it on to the team. And thank you for the report. And I'll put the resolution. We've got to move in a second, haven't we? Yes. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Shannon. We're going to keep going without a cuppa because we've just got one more item. We're going to move into confidential. Have some water. There's plenty of water here. We've got austerity measures. So we need a resolution to move into a confidential session. Councillor Mailing, thank you. Councillor Maru, second.